Now from republic to empire. Okay, so over time, what happened with Rome happens to a lot of places, and they tend to look back and make a sort of a bigger deal about the republic and imagine that it had the kind of liberties that I mean it had, but they're maybe embellishing a little bit and things along those lines. So what happened is civil and military leaders gradually dismantled the Republican Constitution, and so a few people got a lot more power over time, and that's over long stretches of time in civilizations. This tends to be a theme, or this tends to happen a lot, of course, and it has to do with rich people, of course, have the money, and so they'll change things, whether it's tax laws. We just need to change this tax law a little bit. How is this property taxed? Who can buy and sell into this property? Who can do this other form of Well, if you've got the money for the clout, I mean, we would call them lobbyists now. So if you're going to pay a lot of lobbyists to go represent you, in our case in Washington, well, that's still, I mean, rich, you have your interests, right? And if you can express and get your interests in over time, basically rich people end up with all the marbles. Right? And so this started to happen before this period of empire that we're going to talk about. So while this was going on, the Gracchi or Gracchi brothers, they said, well, wait a minute, we can go the other way, right? We can go back toward a more republican form of government, and they basically got squashed, right? Also, sort of a theme that shows up at times. So think of it more as a background influence that made a fragmented situation that started a civil war. Very common theme over time. And so in this period where it's difficult to determine who has the real power and who is holding that, that's when Julius Caesar took off. So he laid the ground quite a bit before he took over, and he was also a very competent and capable general, besides all the other stuff that he was good at, right? So when he went to fight later on, when his people saw him fight, it was very different than later on when the army was reporting to Caesar, right? So Julius Caesar's armies tended to be loyal to him. It was this same guy, but there's another few generals running around. Some of them that were widely thought to be better than Julius Caesar at the time, that proved not to be the case. Well, they were loyal to those particular generals and so on. Okay, so as a politician, Julius Caesar spent a whole lot of time he would fund public spectacles, right? So pay for them. So whether that's battles, gladiators, wild animals, keep your name out there, right? I paid for this. This is entertainment, and I don't want to belabor the point too much, but remember, this is way before screens and televisions and radios and stuff like this. So it's a big to-do. So Caesar was the one that led the army to Gaul, or today we'd call it France, where he's tooling around. This is where, when Rome started to collapse, this is where he was at the time, and he decided to come back. And then later, so he does come back, he does take over, and they kill Julius Caesar, right? They are essentially the Roman senators, or mostly the moneyed people who were seeing him as a threat to their power and money, right? Influence, all of that stuff. All right, so when he said et tu, Brute was Brutus was from a family that went back way back, and if I remember correctly, was much more prestigious than the family that Julius Caesar came out of. By the way, all these good presentation topics. So Augustus, so I believe it was his nephew, his adopted nephew, but legally his heir. Right, and then Roman law is a whole other thing. That Romans had a very good and just over time for what it was supposed to do. Anyway, laws. So it goes to Octavian, right? And Octavian, not a good general, but one of his best buddies, Agrippa, he gets him as a general. Your book doesn't talk about Agrippa too much. I don't think at all, if I remember correctly, because I would have highlighted him. it's really Agrippa that defeats Mark Antony and Cleopatra. And what had happened here is it was like from up above when he was still a very young man and they broke it up a little bit. Mark Antony was supposed to run ancient Egypt. Egypt, very important to Rome because it's still what's called the breadbasket of the ancient world. They needed to secure grain coming in because at this point Rome has like 1 million people. It's an incredibly multicultural city, but it can't feed itself because it's long outgrown what the fields around it will provide. And so they had to go deeper and deeper into Italy itself, and that wasn't the best way to feed Rome, essentially. And so a much better way was to keep those ships moving from ancient Egypt, where, remember, it's still the case that the Nile is flooding every year and they're getting good staple annual grain. So Mark Antony is there to secure all this. But then Caesar Augustus Octavian starts seeing him as a threat. Antony, a much better general than Octavian himself. Octavian is a shrewd politician, and he can sort of see the chessboard. He's a good chess player, right? So he did some very, very smart or wise things, would say, that helped secure him as a great name in world leaders. But in terms of manliness and troops following him and all that, Mark Antony was probably way better. It's just that Agrippa ends up beating both. Mark Antony allied with essentially his subject here, Cleopatra. He's there to control the situation, but it seems like, they fell in love, had children, and he more or less adapted to ancient Egypt at the time. And Cleopatra, by the way, the Ptolemies is where Cleopatra comes from, which is after Alexander came through. We're going to revisit this a little bit later on when we get to world religions. After Alexander dies, one of his generals, Ptolemy, goes down to ancient Egypt, and this is the last one of his heirs. And this is a few hundred years before all this, with Alexander, that we're going to revisit. Okay, so one of the things I said, when Octavian was smart, he took over like a really good infrastructure with a lot of bureaucrats who knew what they were doing. And so, whereas today we use the word bureaucrat like in a bad sense because we're always hampered with the bureaucracy, got stuck in line at the DMV. This period is much closer to the time where it's just chaos. So the analogy I like to give is, if I just stick with that, with the DMV, people say, well, I don't like the government. I'm a libertarian. Really, anybody should be able to do what they want to. So, anybody can drive a car, right? Well, as soon as anyone drives a car, then all of a sudden, like, somebody gets too drunk at their house and they're sending their 12-year-old or whatever, right? And they're sending their 12-year-old out for a run to go get smokes or whatever it is, and then bang, 12-year-old runs into your wife and kids, kills them. Right, or something just otherwise. You need laws in the first place before you could into a functioning society before you can get frustrated with all of this. So now we're on the good side. We don't hear about any sort of craziness, and so substitute the different stuff in a different context. And then all we hear about is, my God, I had to wait in line at the DMV, but we've lost even generational memories now of the good parts that it does in terms of keeping things humming along. And so Augustus did not get rid of all this. And so when he takes over, I'm stressing this here because we're going to see in a lot of other rulers, they either didn't have it or dismantled it. Mostly didn't have it to start out with. So we'll see a rise of great military leaders all over the world, but then after they die, it breaks up either right after their death or over the next few decades with their descendants, because the blood ties do not substitute for a functional bureaucracy. Okay, so this is what we mean by Octavian. Caesar Augustus proceeded more cautiously. And this first things first here, and this is fresh in everybody's mind. He says, like, the military is now going to report to me. It seems obvious, but it wasn't the way that Rome functioned before that. And these are famous Roman roads. Some of these are still functional, by the way. There's if any of you have ever been to Palestine, and I believe it's still the case that they have the route around Jesus' walk to the cross, essentially, in Jerusalem. And if they are correct about the cell that he was held in and the road that he walked down, that road is still a Roman road. It's still functional. And the reason is this will kill you if you start thinking about it, because then you'll start to think about how bad our roads are in Grayson County and why can't we build better roads. And in part because these are simple and they work. And remember, we're talking carts. They standardized the carts, by the way, so that they knew about the size of carts. Everyone should have they can pass or go in different directions in sections of the roads that they needed to, and so on. But the basic road, dig into it a little bit. Make sure that it gets drainage, because when water starts freezing and thawing, that causes problems. It's about impossible to control over time. So just don't have water stay in or stand in there for a long time. So small pieces, sand into pebbles, and then finally on top, large flat paving stones. And they're going to have to live off the earth, as it were. It's very darn near impossible to haul everything from a quarry. So around in the area, all over, look at all roads are going to end up leading to Rome, so the saying goes. Well, this is why. They were just really simple, really effective. At times, they got the army to start functioning as like the corps of engineers to help with this, if they needed them to. And so we're talking about the road section here, but it's also things like if you need to get a letter dispatched, if you need to do something fairly quickly. Besides the Romes, they had a pretty elaborate system of ships. So you would know, like, from this port, you could jump to this port, and so on. This is how, as we're going to see, and you may have had this if you go to a church around here, if you've ever covered, like, Paul in the New Testament. Remember Saul that turns to Paul, and he's always traveling all over the place. Look at how many of his different books in the New Testament. When he's writing letters to people, he said, well, I was just there not too long ago, and now y'all have already started acting up, and so I'm writing this letter. Everybody's traveling off of that infrastructure that the Romans built, which is incredibly important. And I think that'll do it for our purposes here anyway. And do remember, when I'm covering these, I'm just skating on ice here, right? Just the first inch or two into an entire sea of depth, because that's just how this course functions.